The white parachute should have meant safety, surrender, the end of the fight. But why were American soldiers aiming their rifles at it instead of lowering their weapons? Captain Joseph Robinson watched through his binoculars as the German pilot descended slowly toward their lines, hands clearly raised, no weapon visible. Everything about the scene followed protocol perfectly, except for one detail that made absolutely no sense. The moment his boots touched ground, 3 figures appeared on the distant ridge moving fast, German uniforms, coming for their own man, and the pilot's face showed something Robinson had seen 1,000 times in combat, but never from someone who should have been relieved to survive. Terror. December 1944 marked the darkest winter of the European theatre, where Allied forces had pushed deep into Belgium and Luxembourg only to face Hitler's desperate counter-offensive through the Ardennes forest that military historians would later call the Battle of the Bulge. The German Luftwaffe, though severely depleted after years of attrition against Allied air superiority, had launched coordinated strikes against forward American positions using their remaining Messerschmitt fighters and Focke-Wulf bombers in a final attempt to disrupt supply lines and communication networks that kept General Patton's Third Army advancing toward the Rhine River. Captain Joseph Robinson commanded the air defense coordination for the 319th Fighter Squadron stationed near Bastogne, where his unit provided tactical air support and maintained combat air patrols over a 15-mile radius that protected supply convoys moving through territory, where German forces still controlled scattered pockets of resistance and conducted lightning raids against isolated American units. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees below freezing, and thick cloud cover that morning had grounded most reconnaissance flights, creating blind spots in intelligence reports that made every radar contact a potential threat, requiring immediate response. Robinson had grown up in rural Montana, where his father operated a small airfield that serviced crop dusters and occasionally hosted barnstorming pilots who performed aerobatic shows for farming communities scattered across vast stretches of prairie land where entertainment was scarce and any break from routine was celebrated. He learned to fly at age 14 in a rickety Piper Cub that his father had rebuilt from salvaged parts, and by 17 he could execute barrel rolls and inverted flight with precision that impressed even veteran pilots who had flown combat missions during the First World War. When war broke out in Europe and the United States Army Air Forces began recruiting pilots with advanced training, Robinson enlisted immediately, despite his mother's tearful protests and his father's quiet concern that his only son might not return from a war that had already consumed millions of lives across 2 continents. He earned his commission through Officer Candidate School in San Antonio, Texas, where instructors praised his tactical thinking and his unusual ability to remain calm during simulated emergency scenarios that caused other candidates to panic and make fatal errors in judgment. What set Robinson apart from other pilots, however, was not just his technical skill, but his deep respect for the international laws of warfare that he had studied extensively after witnessing a German prisoner of war being beaten by American soldiers at a training facility in Georgia, an incident that troubled him so deeply that he spent weeks reading every available text on the Geneva Conventions and the rules that supposedly governed conduct even in the midst of total war. His unit had been tracking a formation of German fighters that radar operators detected moving southwest toward American artillery positions when one Messerschmitt broke formation and engaged a lone P-47 Thunderbolt in a dogfight that spiraled down through cloud cover until both aircraft disappeared from radar screens. Robinson ordered 2 flights to scramble and provide support, but by the time his pilots reached the engagement zone, the German fighter was trailing thick black smoke and losing altitude rapidly while the American Thunderbolt circled at a safe distance, having scored critical hits on the enemy aircraft's engine and fuel system. The Messerschmitt pilot attempted to maintain control for another 30 seconds before his canopy exploded outward and his ejection seat fired, sending him arcing away from the disintegrating aircraft as his parachute deployed at approximately 8,000 feet, a white canopy that stood out starkly against gray winter clouds and marked his descent toward American-controlled territory. Robinson grabbed his field radio and contacted ground units in the landing zone, ordering them to secure the area and prepare to take the German pilot into custody according to established protocols for handling prisoners of war. The Geneva Convention was explicit on this point. Pilots who ejected from damaged aircraft and descended by parachute were considered hors de combat, out of combat, and therefore protected non-combatants who could not be fired upon or harmed while descending or after landing if they surrendered peacefully. His executive officer, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, questioned the order immediately, pointing out that the same German pilot had been strafing their supply convoys just 30 minutes earlier and had likely killed American soldiers before being shot down. Robinson understood the sentiment, but refused to compromise on the principle, explaining that the moment a pilot ejected and became defenseless, the rules of war required humane treatment regardless of previous actions or ongoing hostilities. The German pilot landed hard in a clearing approximately 2 miles from American forward positions, his parachute collapsing around him as infantry from the 942nd Mechanized Battalion moved in to secure him. Robinson drove out to the site personally, arriving just as soldiers pulled the German to his feet and began searching him for weapons. The pilot was young, perhaps 22 years old, with blood running from a gash on his forehead and burns on his hands from his aircraft's fire. He stood rigidly at attention despite obvious pain, his jaw set in defiance, his eyes scanning the American soldiers surrounding him with an expression that mixed fear with stubborn pride. Robinson approached slowly and addressed him in German, asking if he required medical attention. The pilot's eyes widened in surprise before he responded that his injuries were minor and requested only water. Sergeant William Foster, the ranking enlisted man on scene, pulled Robinson aside and showed him what they had found in the German pilot's flight suit. Folded inside a waterproof pouch were 3 pages of technical documents covered in complex diagrams and mathematical calculations, along with photographs of what appeared to be a new type of aircraft or missile with swept-back wings, unlike anything Allied intelligence had documented. The documents included German text referencing Vergeltungswaffe Drei, Vengeance Weapon 3, and included performance specifications suggesting speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, far beyond the capability of any known aircraft. Foster's voice was low and urgent as he explained that these documents could represent critical intelligence about advanced Nazi weapons development, possibly related to the jet-powered fighters that had recently appeared in combat, or something even more dangerous. Robinson stared at the documents while his mind raced through conflicting obligations. Military intelligence would consider these papers invaluable, potentially worth risking lives to secure and analyze. Standard procedure required immediate evacuation of the prisoner and all materials to headquarters for interrogation and technical assessment. But the pilot had surrendered peacefully and was entitled to protection under international law. Searching his person for weapons was permitted, but confiscating personal documents from a prisoner who had not been properly processed raised questions about the limits of permissible conduct under the Geneva Conventions. Movement on the ridge caught his attention. 3 figures in winter camouflage, German insignia visible through binoculars, Waffen-SS markings. They were watching the clearing. Robinson had perhaps 5 minutes before they moved in. The German pilot saw them too. His expression changed. Not relief, something else. Fear. Pure fear. Whatever those documents contained, someone was willing to kill to protect them or to prevent them from reaching Allied intelligence. The pilot looked at Robinson and spoke 2 words in heavily accented English. "Please hurry." Robinson made the decision in less than 3 seconds, acting on instincts honed through 2 years of combat command, where hesitation meant casualties and overthinking meant death. He ordered Sergeant Foster to secure the German pilot in the back of their jeep immediately, while simultaneously directing 2 infantry squads to establish defensive positions along the tree line, facing the ridge where the SS troops had appeared. The technical documents went into Robinson's inside jacket pocket, sealed in their waterproof pouch, and he made a mental note to radio headquarters the moment they reached secure communication range. The German pilot climbed into the jeep without resistance, his burned hands shaking as he gripped the metal frame, his eyes locked on the ridge where his countrymen were now moving down the slope in tactical formation. Robinson noticed something strange about the pilot's reaction. He wasn't looking at the approaching SS troops with hope or relief, but with the kind of dread normally reserved for men facing execution squads. The Geneva Convention provisions regarding prisoners of war had been drafted in 1929 by diplomats and military officers who believed that even in the midst of total war, certain fundamental principles of humanity could be maintained through international agreement and mutual respect among civilized nations. The Third Convention covered treatment of prisoners extensively, establishing clear rules that captured combatants must be treated humanely, provided with adequate food and medical care, protected from violence and intimidation, and allowed to communicate with their families through neutral intermediaries like the International Red Cross. Pilots who ejected from aircraft occupied a particularly protected status under Article 41, which explicitly stated that individuals descending by parachute from disabled aircraft could not be attacked during their descent and must be given opportunity to surrender upon reaching the ground, after which they acquired full prisoner of war status with all associated protections. The rules seemed clear and straightforward when written in formal legal language and debated in conference rooms in Switzerland, but Robinson had learned during his time in combat that war created situations where following one rule meant violating another, where protecting one life meant endangering many others, and where the right choice according to international law sometimes felt catastrophically wrong according to battlefield reality. The technical documents pressed against Robinson's chest felt heavier with each passing second as he considered their potential significance. Allied intelligence had been desperately seeking information about German advanced weapons programs ever since rumors began circulating about jet-powered aircraft, rocket-propelled bombs, and other technologies that could potentially shift the balance of power even as Nazi Germany faced defeat on multiple fronts. The V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets that had terrorized London represented just the beginning of what German engineers might accomplish if given sufficient time and resources, and any intelligence about a V-3 weapon system could provide crucial warning about capabilities that Allied forces were unprepared to counter. If these documents contained genuine technical specifications for an advanced weapon, they represented intelligence worth more than individual lives, more than strict adherence to protocol, potentially more than Robinson's career or his personal honor. But confiscating them from a prisoner who had surrendered under protection of international law violated the very principles that supposedly distinguished Allied forces from their enemies, principles that Robinson had sworn to uphold when he accepted his commission and took command of men whose lives depended on his moral clarity as much as his tactical competence. The SS troops reached the base of the ridge and began moving through scattered trees toward the clearing, where Robinson's men had established their defensive perimeter. Lieutenant Chen approached with a tactical assessment. 3 enemy combatants visible, likely advanced scouts for a larger force, armed with Mauser rifles and what appeared to be an MG-42 machine gun. Standard procedure would be to radio for reinforcements and establish a secure corridor for evacuating the prisoner, but radio communication was notoriously unreliable in this sector due to terrain and ongoing German jamming operations. Chen recommended immediate withdrawal to their secondary position 3 miles east, where they could link up with the main battalion and transfer custody of the prisoner to intelligence officers who could properly process both him and any documents he carried. Robinson agreed with the tactical logic, but hesitated because something about the entire situation felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Why would the Luftwaffe send a fighter pilot on a combat mission while he carried highly classified technical documents? Why would SS troops risk exposure and potential capture to recover a single downed pilot when Germany's military situation was so desperate that every soldier was needed on the front lines? And why did the German pilot look more frightened of his rescuers than of his captors? Robinson had interrogated dozens of captured German soldiers during his time in Europe, and most displayed a predictable range of reactions: defiance, relief, resignation, occasionally genuine friendliness toward their American captors who they knew would treat them far better than Soviet forces would. But this pilot displayed something different. something that suggested he knew information that made him dangerous to both sides. Machine gun fire tore through the clearing. Bark exploded from trees to Robinson's left. His men returned fire immediately. The German pilot threw himself flat in the jeep. Robinson saw muzzle flashes from 2 positions, not 3 SS troops, at least 5. They'd been flanked. Chen shouted orders. Soldiers scrambled for better cover. The pilot screamed something in German. Robinson couldn't hear over the gunfire. Then the words registered. "They're not here to rescue me. They're here to kill me." Robinson's mind struggled to process what he'd just heard over the chaos of automatic weapons fire that turned the winter forest into a killing zone where survival depended on split-second decisions and blind luck as much as training or experience. The concept that SS troops would execute their own pilot contradicted everything he understood about military loyalty and national solidarity, especially in a German military culture that prided itself on bonds of brotherhood and unwavering commitment to comrades regardless of battlefield circumstances. But the pilot's terror was genuine, visceral, impossible to fake, and the pattern of incoming fire supported his claim because the SS troops were concentrating their fire on the jeep where the prisoner sat exposed rather than targeting the American soldiers who posed the actual tactical threat. Robinson grabbed the German by his flight jacket and dragged him behind the jeep's engine block, the only cover substantial enough to stop rifle rounds, while Chen directed suppressing fire toward the tree line where muzzle flashes revealed enemy positions. The German pilot's name was Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, and between gasping breaths as bullets sparked off metal inches from his head, he explained in broken English mixed with German that Robinson struggled to follow. Richter had been stationed at a Luftwaffe research facility near Peenemünde on the Baltic coast, where scientists and engineers worked on advanced aviation projects under direct supervision of SS intelligence officers who answered to Heinrich Himmler rather than Hermann Göring's air ministry. 3 weeks earlier, Richter had been ordered to conduct test flights of a new aircraft design that incorporated jet propulsion technology combined with swept-wing aerodynamics that German engineers had discovered could dramatically reduce drag at high speeds and potentially allow aircraft to approach the speed of sound. The project was designated Horten Ho 229, a flying wing design that resembled nothing in current military aviation and promised performance capabilities that would make Allied fighters obsolete overnight. Richter had flown the prototype twice before discovering something during his pre-flight inspection that convinced him the project was not merely a weapon system, but something far more sinister that violated even the flexible ethics of desperate wartime research. The technical documents in Robinson's pocket contained complete specifications for weaponizing the Horten aircraft with a modified V-2 rocket guidance system and a payload that Richter's engineering background told him was designed to carry either chemical or biological weapons rather than conventional explosives. The math didn't make sense for high explosives. The payload weight was too light, the dispersal calculations were wrong, and the detonation altitude was specified at 5,000 feet rather than ground level, which was optimal only for distributing aerosol agents over maximum area, rather than concentrated destruction of hardened targets. Richter had confronted his commanding officer about the specifications and was told curtly that the weapon's purpose was classified at the highest level and that further questions would be considered treasonous. That night, Richter copied the documents and hid them in his flight suit, planning to defect at the first opportunity. When his aircraft was scrambled that morning to intercept American fighters, he deliberately maneuvered into engagement range, hoping to be shot down over Allied territory where he could surrender and provide warning about what the SS was planning. What Richter hadn't anticipated was that SS counterintelligence officers monitoring the research facility had noticed his unusual behavior during the days following his confrontation with his commander and had flagged him as a potential security risk. When his aircraft went down over Allied territory, standing orders were activated immediately. Eliminate the pilot and recover or destroy the documents at any cost. The SS had dispatched a full Einsatzkommando, a special action unit, not the 3 soldiers Robinson initially spotted, but at least 12 highly trained operatives equipped with the mission parameters to kill anyone, German or American, who stood between them and their objective. The 3 visible soldiers on the ridge had been bait, deliberately exposing themselves to fix American attention, while the main assault force maneuvered into flanking positions. Robinson understood the tactical situation instantly and knew his small force was catastrophically outnumbered and outmaneuvered by an enemy who had surprise, positioning, and apparently unlimited authorization to use whatever force necessary to complete their mission. His radio operator tried desperately to raise battalion headquarters, but got only static and broken fragments of transmission that suggested German jamming equipment was operating nearby. Sergeant Foster reported 2 men wounded, 1 seriously, and ammunition running low because this was supposed to be a simple prisoner recovery operation, not a sustained firefight against elite troops. Chen was already organizing a fighting withdrawal toward a depression in the ground 50 yards east that offered some cover, but reaching it meant crossing open ground under direct fire. The German pilot grabbed Robinson's arm and spoke urgently, his English suddenly clearer as adrenaline sharpened his focus. He explained that the documents Robinson carried were not just technical specifications, but included coded references to 3 target coordinates in England where the SS planned to deploy the weapon within weeks. Allied intelligence could decode those coordinates and potentially prevent mass casualties that would dwarf anything the V-weapons had accomplished. But the SS would never allow those documents to reach Allied command, which meant they would pursue Robinson's unit relentlessly, calling in reinforcements, air support, anything necessary to recover or destroy the intelligence. Richter said there was only one way to guarantee the information survived. Robinson needed to memorize the critical details and destroy the physical documents, making Richter himself the only evidence that needed protection. Robinson stared at the German pilot and saw something he recognized from his own reflection in darker moments: the exhaustion that comes from carrying knowledge too heavy for one person to bear alone. He pulled the documents from his jacket and began reading technical specifications by numbers and coordinates that meant nothing to him, but that he forced into memory through sheer discipline. Chemical formulas, target grid references, altitude calculations, production timelines. Each fact burned into his consciousness while bullets tore through the forest around them. An explosion erupted 30 feet behind their position, grenades. The SS was closing the perimeter. Chen was screaming for immediate withdrawal. Foster's wounded soldier was unconscious, bleeding out. Robinson had perhaps 20 seconds to make 3 impossible decisions simultaneously: save his men, protect the prisoner, or preserve the intelligence. The rules of war said prisoner safety was absolute. Military necessity said intelligence was paramount. Combat leadership said his men came first. All 3 choices were right. None could be compromised. Every second of delay meant more Americans dead. Richter solved the problem by standing up and running toward the SS positions with his hands raised, shouting in German that he surrendered and had the documents. Robinson lunged to stop him, but was half a second too late. The pilot made it 15 feet before automatic weapons fire cut him down. His body jerked 3 times and collapsed. The SS troops stopped firing. They were coming to recover the documents they believed were still on Richter's body. Robinson had maybe 45 seconds. He burned the papers with his lighter, committed every detail to memory, and ordered his men to run. Robinson's unit ran through frozen forest for 43 minutes straight, carrying their wounded soldier on an improvised stretcher, while German voices echoed behind them and occasional rifle shots cracked through bare winter branches overhead. The SS troops were tracking them methodically, not rushing, confident that their quarry had nowhere to go in territory where German forces still controlled multiple strongpoints and could call in reinforcements from nearby positions. Robinson forced his mind to focus on 2 tasks simultaneously: maintaining tactical awareness of his surroundings while also cycling through the technical data he'd memorized from Richter's documents, repeating coordinates and specifications in rhythm with his footsteps to burn them permanently into memory, where they couldn't be lost if he was wounded or killed. The information felt like physical weight pressing on his consciousness. 3 sets of grid coordinates in southeastern England, a chemical formula with 17 components, production timeline indicating first deployment in 9 days, and altitude specifications that confirmed Richter's assessment that the weapon was designed to disperse biological or chemical agents over civilian population centers rather than military targets. They reached a frozen streambed that offered concealment and followed it northeast for another mile, before Chen spotted movement ahead that turned out to be American M4 Sherman tanks from the 10th Armored Division conducting a reconnaissance sweep through contested territory. Robinson's relief lasted exactly 5 seconds before he realized that reaching friendly forces meant entering a bureaucratic and chain-of-command nightmare where explaining why he'd destroyed classified documents and relied on memory to preserve intelligence would require convincing skeptical officers that his unverifiable claims justified immediate action. Military intelligence procedures required physical documentation for any threat assessment that would trigger major operational responses, and Robinson's burned papers and testimony from a dead German pilot would likely be dismissed as insufficient evidence to redirect resources away from ongoing combat operations. He needed credibility beyond his captain's rank, needed someone with authority to believe him instantly and act without waiting for verification through normal channels that would consume days or weeks they didn't have. The Armored Column commander was Major Theodore Walsh, a career officer from Virginia, who Robinson recognized from intelligence briefings at division headquarters, where Walsh had earned a reputation for aggressive tactical thinking and minimal patience for standard procedure when battlefield conditions required immediate decisions. Robinson laid out everything in 3 minutes: the downed pilot, the SS execution squad, the technical documents, Richter's sacrifice, and the memorized specifications that indicated a weapon deployment against British civilian targets within 9 days. Walsh listened without interruption, his expression neutral until Robinson finished, then asked 3 questions that demonstrated he understood both the intelligence value and the verification problem. Could Robinson reproduce the technical specifications in written form? Yes. Did the coordinates follow standard German military grid reference format? Yes. Was there any physical evidence beyond Robinson's testimony? The dead pilot's body, if it hadn't been recovered by SS troops, and potentially witnesses among Robinson's unit who had seen the documents before they were destroyed. Walsh made his decision with the same aggressive certainty that had earned him 3 battlefield promotions in 18 months. He ordered his radio operator to establish communication with Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force through encrypted channels and requested immediate priority contact with technical intelligence staff who could evaluate specifications for advanced German weapons systems. The radio operator worked for 12 minutes before establishing a broken connection with a signals unit that relayed Walsh's request up the chain of command. 90 minutes later, Robinson found himself in a commandeered Belgian farmhouse, speaking via radio to a British intelligence officer named Colonel David Pemberton, who specialized in German rocket and aircraft programs, and who listened to Robinson's recitation of technical data with increasingly urgent questions that suggested the information matched existing intelligence fragments that analysts had been trying to piece together for months. Pemberton explained that British intelligence had intercepted scattered radio transmissions and agent reports referencing a new Vergeltungswaffe system, but had assumed it was propaganda or misinformation designed to maintain German morale as military defeat became inevitable. The technical specifications Robinson provided, particularly the chemical formula and dispersal calculations, matched research that Allied scientists knew was theoretically possible, but hadn't believed Germany could accomplish given their resource constraints and deteriorating industrial capacity. The 3 target coordinates Robinson had memorized corresponded to population centers in London, Manchester, and Birmingham, cities that housed critical war production facilities, but also millions of civilians who would be defenseless against a chemical or biological attack delivered from high altitude by an aircraft faster than anything Allied fighters could intercept. Pemberton said he was forwarding Robinson's intelligence immediately to the highest levels of British command and to American Strategic Air Force headquarters, and that if the information proved accurate, Robinson had potentially prevented the largest mass casualty attack of the entire war. The verification came 72 hours later, when RAF reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Luftwaffe research facility at Peenemünde and identified 3 Horten flying wing aircraft on the airfield, along with what appeared to be specialized payload containers being loaded under heavy security. Allied Strategic Bombing Command immediately diverted 800 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers from their scheduled missions and conducted a maximum effort raid that destroyed the entire facility, along with its aircraft, support structures, and research laboratories. German casualties were estimated at over 2,000 personnel, including most of the SS technical staff and scientific team working on the weapon system. British intelligence confirmed through subsequent agent reports that the attack had eliminated Germany's capacity to deploy the biological weapon and had set their advanced aircraft program back at least 6 months, by which time the European war would be effectively over. Robinson received a commendation for exceptional intelligence work and was quietly informed that his actions had saved an estimated 50,000 to 200,000 British civilians from a weapon that post-war analysis confirmed would have used a modified anthrax strain designed to survive dispersal at high altitude and remain viable in urban environments for up to 72 hours. The commendation was classified and would remain sealed for decades, and Robinson was instructed to never discuss the incident publicly. He accepted the restrictions without complaint because the outcome mattered more than recognition, and because he understood that what had happened in that Belgian forest went beyond simple military success or intelligence collection. The Geneva Convention rules about protecting surrendered combatants hadn't been designed for situations where the enemy would execute their own soldiers to protect secrets, or where a single prisoner carried information worth thousands of lives. Robinson had violated the letter of the law by confiscating documents from a protected prisoner, but he'd upheld its spirit by trying to preserve Richter's life, even when tactical logic said the intelligence was more valuable than any individual. Richter had made his own choice, one that honored the deeper principle underlying all the rules of war, that some things were worth dying for, and that protecting innocent people from weapons designed for mass murder transcended national loyalty or military obligation. 3 weeks after the raid on Peenemünde, Robinson received a letter through irregular channels from a German-speaking Allied intelligence officer who had interviewed captured Luftwaffe personnel from the research facility. One engineer mentioned that Oberleutnant Klaus Richter had been under investigation for potential defection, and that his death during an attempted escape had been reported as suicide by enemy fire. The engineer said Richter had once told him that the rules of war existed not to constrain soldiers, but to remind them they were still human beings, capable of choosing honor over expedience. Robinson folded the letter carefully and kept it in his jacket pocket next to where Richter's documents had been. Some choices couldn't be judged by regulations or laws. They could only be measured by what they prevented and who they saved. The white parachute had meant surrender and safety, after all, just not in the way anyone expected. And the rule that protected falling enemies had worked exactly as intended, by reminding everyone involved that even in war, some principles were absolute.